The morning light filtered through the Spanish moss outside my bedroom window, casting familiar shadows across the hardwood floors of the house I'd called home for 43 years. At 72, I'd grown accustomed to the rhythm of solitary mornings, coffee at 6 a.m., the Charleston Post and Courier spread across the kitchen table, and the kind of profound quiet that settles over a house where children once laughed but no longer visit. It was Tuesday, March 15th, when I learned my daughter was getting married. Not from Sarah herself, mind you, but from Margaret Chen, my neighbor of 2 decades, who approached me while I was tending to the azaleas that had been Eleanor's pride and joy before cancer took her 3 years ago. "William," Margaret said, her voice carrying that particular tone women use when they're about to deliver news that will require careful handling, "I ran into Sarah at the farmer's market yesterday." I set down my pruning shears, my arthritis-worn hands stiff from the morning's garden work. Sarah lived less than 20 miles away in Mount Pleasant, but our paths crossed about as often as solar eclipses, deliberately and with astronomical rarity. "How is she?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Sarah had been fine in our brief obligatory interactions for the past 8 years. Fine when I saw her at Eleanor's funeral. Fine during our stilted Christmas phone calls. Fine in the way that people are fine when they're working very hard not to be anything else. She looked radiant, actually. She was shopping for flowers, and when I asked what the occasion was, Margaret paused, clearly uncomfortable with being the bearer of information that should have come from family. "William, she's getting married next month to a lovely young man named David Torres." The words hit me like a physical blow, though I kept my expression carefully neutral. Sarah was getting married, and I was learning about it from a neighbor who'd happened to run into her at the farmer's market. "Did she mention the date?" I asked, my voice steady despite the churning in my chest. "April 22nd, at Magnolia Plantation. Margaret seemed to think—" Margaret trailed off, clearly realizing she was venturing into delicate territory. "What did she seem to think?" "That it would be a small ceremony, just close family and friends." Close family. The phrase carried weight that Margaret couldn't possibly understand. For the past 8 years, since the argument that had fractured our relationship beyond what either of us seemed capable of repairing, I had not been considered close family in Sarah's life. I thanked Margaret for the information and returned to my azaleas, but the morning's peace had been shattered. My only child, my daughter, who had once been my closest companion, was getting married in 5 weeks, and she hadn't told me. That evening, I sat in Eleanor's chair. I still couldn't think of it as simply the chair, and tried to remember when exactly everything had gone so wrong between Sarah and me. The obvious answer was 8 years ago, during the aftermath of Eleanor's first cancer diagnosis. Sarah had wanted her mother to pursue every possible treatment to fight the disease with the kind of aggressive determination that had characterized Sarah's approach to every challenge in her life. She was 34 then, a successful architect with her own firm, a woman who believed that problems existed to be solved and obstacles existed to be overcome. I had supported Eleanor's decision to pursue palliative care instead of brutal treatments that might extend her life by months while destroying whatever quality remained. Eleanor had been an oncology nurse for 30 years before retirement. She understood exactly what aggressive cancer treatment would mean for someone her age with her specific diagnosis. But Sarah couldn't accept that her mother was choosing comfort over cure, and she couldn't forgive me for supporting that choice. "You're giving up on her," Sarah had accused me during the fight that would define our relationship for the next 8 years. "Mom is scared and in pain, and instead of encouraging her to fight, you're helping her surrender." "I'm helping her die with dignity," I'd replied, a response that Sarah had found unforgivably callous. Eleanor lived for 18 months after her diagnosis, 18 months of reasonable health and diminished but meaningful quality of life. Sarah visited dutifully, but maintained an emotional distance that was palpable to everyone in the room. She was cordial to me, respectful to her mother, but the warmth that had once characterized our family interactions had been replaced by a chilly politeness that was somehow worse than open hostility. After Eleanor's funeral, Sarah and I had maintained minimal contact. Obligatory phone calls on birthdays and holidays, brief, awkward encounters at community events, the kind of relationship between two people who shared DNA and history but had forgotten how to share anything else. And now she was getting married. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Sarah's contact information. Her number was still saved as Princess, a nickname from her childhood that now seemed painfully obsolete. I started to dial, then stopped. What would I say? Congratulations on your engagement that I learned about from a neighbor. I hope you'll consider inviting your father to watch you marry a man I've never met. Instead, I climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor and made my way to Sarah's old bedroom, which I'd left largely unchanged since she'd moved out for college 23 years ago. The walls were still painted the pale yellow she'd chosen when she was 14, claiming that pink was infantile and blue was too boyish. Her bookshelf still held the complete works of Jane Austen, a collection of horse novels, and the 3 volumes of her high school yearbooks. But it was her desk that drew my attention tonight. The small roll-top desk had been a Christmas gift when Sarah turned 12, a piece of furniture she'd specifically requested because she wanted somewhere private to write important things. For 6 years, through middle school and high school, Sarah had maintained meticulous journals, recording everything from daily activities to elaborate emotional analyses of her teenage social dynamics. I'd discovered the journals by accident during Sarah's freshman year of college when I was cleaning her room, and one of the desk drawers had stuck open. Inside were 17 small notebooks, each one filled with Sarah's careful handwriting, documenting her thoughts, feelings, dreams, and fears from ages 12 to 18. I'd read a few pages before realizing I was violating her privacy, but what I'd seen had astonished me. The Sarah who emerged from those pages was thoughtful, vulnerable, deeply loving, and utterly devoted to her family. She wrote about her parents with the kind of adoration that most children reserve for celebrities or fictional characters. "Daddy taught me to change a tire today," read one entry from her 13th birthday. "He was so patient, even when I couldn't get the lug nuts loose and started crying. He said the most important thing wasn't being strong enough to do everything by yourself, but being smart enough to know when to ask for help. I hope when I grow up, I'm as wise as Daddy." Another entry from her sophomore year of high school. "Mom and Daddy went dancing tonight for their anniversary. I watched them from the upstairs window when they came home, and Daddy was still twirling Mom around in the driveway like they were still at the dance. I want to marry someone who will still want to dance with me in the driveway when we're old." Page after page revealed a Sarah who saw her parents as heroes, who drew strength from family traditions, who believed that her family was the foundation that would support her through any challenge life might present. That Sarah felt like a different person from the woman who hadn't told her father she was getting married. I carefully removed one of the journals from the drawer, the one from her senior year of high school, when she was 17 and preparing for college. The entries from that period were filled with excitement about the future, but also with anxiety about leaving home and sadness about the changes that independence would bring. "I know I need to grow up and become my own person," she'd written in May of her senior year. "But I hope I never become the kind of person who forgets where she came from or stops needing her family. Daddy says that growing up doesn't mean growing away. It means growing stronger roots so you can reach higher branches." I'd said that to her during one of our evening walks, when she'd been worried about going to college in Virginia and leaving her close-knit Charleston life behind. It had been a casual comment, the kind of parental wisdom that gets dispensed during ordinary moments and then forgotten. But Sarah had remembered it, had written it down, had treasured it enough to record it in her private thoughts. As I sat in her childhood bedroom, holding the journal that contained 17-year-old Sarah's deepest thoughts about family and love and growing up, I realized I had something that might bridge the 8-year chasm between us. Not the journals themselves. Reading them had been an invasion of privacy, and sharing them would be an even greater violation. But the memories they contained, the moments they referenced, the version of our relationship that had existed before grief and disagreement had poisoned everything between us. 17-year-old Sarah had believed that family love could overcome any obstacle. 42-year-old Sarah was getting married without telling her father. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way to remind her of who we used to be to each other. I carefully returned the journal to its drawer and went downstairs to my study. At the small desk where I'd once helped Sarah with homework and where Eleanor had paid bills and planned family vacations, I pulled out a sheet of stationery and began to write. "Dear Sarah," I began, my handwriting shakier than it used to be, but still legible. "I heard through a neighbor that you're getting married next month. I want you to know how happy I am for you and how much I regret that our relationship has been strained enough that you felt you couldn't share this news with me directly." I paused, considering my words carefully. This letter would either open a door or close it permanently. "I know we've had our differences, particularly regarding your mother's final years. I know you believe I failed her, and I know you believe I failed you. Those are wounds that may never fully heal. But Sarah, you're my daughter, and your happiness matters more to me than our disagreements." I wrote about David Torres, expressing hope that he was worthy of her and that he understood what a remarkable woman he was marrying. I wrote about Eleanor, about how proud she would be to see Sarah getting married and how much she would have loved being part of the wedding planning. But mostly, I wrote about love, about the love that had defined our family for 34 years before grief had temporarily obscured it, and about the love that persisted even when it couldn't find expression. "If you choose not to invite me to your wedding, I will understand," I concluded. "But if you could find it in your heart to allow me to be part of this celebration, nothing would make me happier. I love you, Princess. I always have, and I always will." I sealed the letter and addressed it to Sarah's Mount Pleasant address, then walked to the mailbox in the gathering dusk of a Charleston evening. The azaleas Eleanor had planted were beginning to bloom, their pink and white blossoms a promise that beauty could emerge from what had seemed barren. 3 days later, I received Sarah's response. It was a text message. "Dad, I got your letter. I appreciate the sentiment, but I think it's better if you don't come to the wedding. This is a new chapter in my life, and I need to focus on the future rather than revisiting the past. I hope you understand." I stared at that message for a long time, reading it over and over until the words lost meaning and became just symbols on a screen. My daughter was asking me not to come to her wedding. She was starting a new chapter that explicitly didn't include her father. But as I sat in Eleanor's chair that evening, holding Sarah's childhood journal and remembering the girl who had once believed that family love could overcome anything, I realized I wasn't ready to accept that dismissal. Sarah thought she needed to focus on the future rather than revisiting the past. But maybe what she really needed was to remember which parts of the past were worth carrying forward into that future. Maybe it was time for 17-year-old Sarah to remind 42-year-old Sarah about the power of growing stronger roots so you could reach higher branches. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for Friday evening at the Ocean House on Isle of Palms, a waterfront venue that Sarah had chosen for its combination of elegance and intimacy. I learned these details not from my daughter, but from Margaret Chen, who had become my unwitting source of intelligence about an event I was expressly forbidden to attend. "The whole wedding party is staying at the hotel Friday night," Margaret informed me during another conversation over our shared garden fence. Sarah looked absolutely radiant when I saw her picking up her dress from the boutique yesterday. Margaret's updates had become both a blessing and a torture over the past month. Through her, I learned that David Torres was a pediatric surgeon at MUSC, that he was originally from San Antonio, that he'd proposed to Sarah during a weekend trip to Savannah. I discovered that the wedding would be small, just 60 guests, and that Sarah had chosen to walk herself down the aisle rather than have anyone escort her. That last detail had stung more than I'd expected. In all the father-daughter conversations we'd had about Sarah's eventual wedding during her childhood and teenage years, she'd always assumed I would walk her down the aisle. It had been one of those far future certainties that required no discussion, like assuming the sun would rise or that spring would follow winter. Now Sarah would walk alone, and I would watch from a distance if I chose to watch at all. But I had decided not to simply watch. 3 weeks after receiving Sarah's text message asking me not to come to the wedding, I'd made a decision that was either profoundly wise or spectacularly foolish. I was going to attend the rehearsal dinner anyway, not as an invited guest, but as a father who refused to accept that 8 years of estrangement could eclipse 34 years of love. I wasn't planning to crash the event or create a scene. I was planning something more subtle and, I hoped, more powerful. I was going to bring Sarah's 17-year-old voice to speak to her 42-year-old heart. The journal I'd selected was from the spring of Sarah's senior year in high school, the period when she was simultaneously excited about college and anxious about leaving home. But more specifically, it was the journal that contained her thoughts about love, marriage, and the kind of future she wanted to build. I'd spent hours reading through the entries from that period, not to invade Sarah's privacy further, but to understand the dreams and values that had shaped the young woman who had grown into someone I barely recognized. What I'd found was a girl who believed in family, who treasured traditions, who wanted her future marriage to reflect the love she'd witnessed between her parents. I went to Jenny Morrison's wedding today, read one entry from April of her senior year. It was beautiful, but something felt sad about it too. Jenny's dad had to escort her down the aisle because her parents are divorced and her mum doesn't speak to him anymore. During the father-daughter dance, Jenny looked like she was trying not to cry, and not in a good way. The entry continued. I kept thinking about how lucky I am that Mom and Daddy still love each other after 25 years. When I get married, I want it to be a celebration of love that includes everyone who helped make me who I am. I want my future husband to see where I came from and understand that my family is part of what he's marrying. Another entry, from just 2 weeks before her high school graduation. Daddy and I were talking about college tonight, and he got emotional about me leaving home. He said I would always be his little girl, even when I was a grown woman with children of my own. I told him that when I get married, I want him to walk me down the aisle so everyone can see how proud he is of the woman he helped me become. Reading those words, written in Sarah's careful 17-year-old handwriting, had crystallized my decision. That girl had understood something that the woman seemed to have forgotten, that rejecting your past meant rejecting part of yourself. I wasn't going to the rehearsal dinner to embarrass Sarah or to force my way into an event where I wasn't wanted. I was going to remind her of who she used to be and what she used to value, in the hope that those memories might help her find her way back to the person she'd intended to become. Friday afternoon, I drove to Isle of Palms in my 2018 Honda Accord, Eleanor's car, which I'd kept despite barely driving it because letting it go felt like releasing another connection to the life we'd built together. The Ocean House was exactly the kind of venue Sarah would choose. Elegant but not ostentatious, beautiful but not overwhelming, sophisticated but still warm. I parked across the street from the hotel and waited. At 5:30 p.m., cars began arriving. I recognized some of the guests. Sarah's college roommate Jennifer, her cousin Mark from Atlanta, several family friends who had maintained relationships with Sarah, even as mine had deteriorated. They looked happy, excited, dressed in the kind of carefully casual attire that expensive rehearsal dinners required. At 5:45, a black BMW pulled into the valet area, and Sarah emerged from the passenger side. I hadn't seen my daughter in person for almost a year, and the sight of her took my breath away. She was beautiful. She'd always been beautiful, but there was something different about her now. She looked confident in a way that seemed both natural and carefully constructed, like someone who had learned to project success and happiness as a form of armor. David Torres came around from the driver's side, and I got my first look at the man my daughter was marrying. He was tall, probably 6 feet, with dark hair and an easy smile that suggested both intelligence and kindness. When he took Sarah's hand, she leaned into him with the kind of unconscious intimacy that spoke of genuine affection. They looked like they belonged together, which should have made me happy, but instead made me sadder. Sarah had found love, had found partnership, had found the future she'd dreamed about as a teenager, and I was watching it from across the street like a stranger. I waited until the valet had disappeared with their car, then crossed the street and entered the Ocean House lobby. The rehearsal dinner was being held in the Palmetto Room, a private dining space that overlooked the marina. I could hear laughter and conversation through the partially open doors, the sounds of a family celebration in full swing. For a moment, I almost lost my nerve. What was I doing? Sarah had specifically asked me not to come. I was about to intrude on the most important weekend of her life, armed with nothing but a 17-year-old journal and a father's desperate hope that love could bridge 8 years of silence. But then I heard Sarah's laugh, a sound I hadn't heard in person for far too long, and I remembered why I was there. I approached the hostess station, where a young woman in a black dress was checking in late arrivals. "Excuse me," I said. "I'm William Harrison, Sarah's father." "I know I'm not on the list, but I was hoping to speak with my daughter briefly." The hostess looked confused, clearly unsure how to handle a situation that wasn't covered in her training. Let me check with the bride," she said, disappearing into the Palmetto Room. A few minutes later, Sarah appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of shock, anger, and something that might have been fear. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "I needed to see you, Princess. I needed to give you something. I told you I didn't want you to come. This is my rehearsal dinner, Dad, my wedding weekend. You can't just show up because you disagree with my decision." I pulled the journal from my jacket pocket, the small purple notebook that contained her 17-year-old dreams about love and marriage and family. "I'm not here to disagree with your decision, Sarah. I'm here because I found this in your old room, and I think there's someone who needs to remind you of something important." Sarah stared at the journal, recognition dawning in her eyes. "That's my old diary. Dad, you had no right to read my private—" "I didn't read it to invade your privacy. I read it to remember who we used to be to each other. And Sarah, the girl who wrote in this journal, would be heartbroken to know that you're getting married without your father present. That girl didn't understand what it meant to watch her mother die because her father gave up on fighting for her life." The words hung between us like a blade, sharp enough to cut through 8 years of careful avoidance. We were finally talking about it. The fundamental disagreement that had destroyed our relationship and left us both wounded in ways that had never properly healed. "That girl," I said quietly, "understood that love sometimes means letting go. She understood it because I taught her that and because your mother taught her that. The question is whether the woman standing in front of me still remembers those lessons." Sarah's composure was cracking, the careful mask of adult control giving way to something more vulnerable. Dad, you can't just show up here with my teenage diary and expect everything to be forgiven. You can't use my own words against me. I'm not using your words against you, Princess. I'm offering them back to you. The girl who wrote in this journal believed that family love was strong enough to survive anything. She believed that growing up meant growing stronger roots, not cutting them off entirely. I held out the journal to her. I'm not asking you to invite me to your wedding. I'm not asking you to forgive 8 years of hurt and misunderstanding in a single conversation. I'm asking you to remember who you wanted to be when you imagined this day. Sarah took the journal with trembling hands, her eyes filling with tears she was fighting to control. Dad, I can't do this right now. My rehearsal dinner is starting. David's family is here. My friends are here. Then don't do it right now. Take the journal. Read what 17-year-old Sarah wrote about love and marriage and family. Read what she wrote about the kind of wedding she wanted. And then decide whether 42-year-old Sarah agrees with her. I turned to leave, then stopped. Sarah, I love you. I've loved you every day for 42 years, and I'll love you every day for whatever time I have left. That girl who wrote in that journal knew that love was the most important thing a family could give each other. I hope the woman she became still knows it too. I walked out of the Ocean House without looking back, my hands shaking as I got into Eleanor's car. I had no idea whether I'd just opened a door or destroyed any remaining possibility of reconciliation. But I'd done the only thing I could think to do. I'd reminded Sarah of who she used to be and asked her to consider whether that person was worth remembering. The drive home to Charleston took 40 minutes. 40 minutes during which I replayed every word of our conversation and wondered whether I'd made the biggest mistake of my life or taken the first step toward healing an 8-year wound. Either way, it was done. Sarah had her journal, her 17-year-old voice, and her memories of what she'd once believed about family and love and forgiveness. Now all I could do was wait to see whether those memories were strong enough to bridge the distance between who she'd been and who she'd become. I spent Friday evening in Eleanor's chair, staring at the phone and wondering whether I'd destroyed any remaining chance of reconciliation with my daughter or taken the first step toward healing that might still be possible. The rehearsal dinner would be ending around 10 p.m., and then Sarah would have the entire night to read through 17-year-old thoughts about love, marriage, and family that might feel like messages from a stranger who happened to share her name. At 11:47 p.m., my phone rang. Dad? Sarah's voice was soft, uncertain, nothing like the controlled anger she'd displayed at the Ocean House. Hi, Princess. I read it. The whole journal. I remembered things I'd forgotten I ever thought. I could hear traffic in the background suggesting she was driving somewhere, probably back to her Mount Pleasant house where she could have this conversation in private. And I realized that 17-year-old me would be furious with 42-year-old me for so many things. Not just about you, but about how I've been living, how I've been thinking about family and forgiveness, and what really matters. I waited, not wanting to push too hard when she seemed to be working through something important. Dad, there's an entry in here from right after Mum's diagnosis. I'd completely forgotten about it. I wrote about how scared I was, but also about how much I trusted you and Mom to make the right decisions together. I wrote that even though I didn't want Mom to die, I knew that you loved her enough to help her do whatever would make her happiest. My throat tightened. I didn't remember Sarah expressing anything like that sentiment during Eleanor's illness. All I remembered was her anger, her accusations, her belief that I was giving up rather than fighting. What changed, Sarah? How did we go from that understanding to 8 years of silence? I think I was so scared of losing Mom that I needed someone to blame when the worst happened, and you were the easiest target because you'd supported her decision to prioritize comfort over cure." Sarah's voice broke slightly. "But Dad, reading this journal, I remember now that Mom's decision wasn't about giving up. It was about choosing how to live whatever time she had left. And you weren't giving up on her. You were respecting her choice, even when it was breaking your heart." I felt tears running down my cheeks, 8 years of grief and guilt and loneliness finally finding release. "Princess, I've regretted so many things about those months. I've wondered if I should have fought harder for treatment, if I should have overruled her decision, if I failed both of you by not insisting on every possible intervention." "You didn't fail us, Dad. You honored Mom's autonomy and dignity even when it was the hardest thing you'd ever done. 17-year-old me understood that. It took 42-year-old me 8 years and a diary to remember it." We were both crying now. 8 years of unspoken grief and love and regret flowing between us through a phone connection that felt more intimate than any conversation we'd had since Eleanor's funeral. "Sarah, I want you to know that if you still prefer that I not come to your wedding tomorrow, I'll respect that decision. I didn't give you the journal to guilt you into changing your mind. I gave it to you because I wanted you to remember who you used to be, whether that affected your wedding plans or not." "Dad, about tomorrow." Sarah paused, and I could hear her taking a deep breath. "I want you there. Not just because 17-year-old me would want it, but because 42-year-old me has realized that getting married without my father present would be a betrayal of everything Mom taught us about family." "Are you sure? What about David? What about the guests? What about the seating arrangements and dinner planning?" "David's been asking about you for months. He thinks it's crazy that you're not part of our lives. And he's been gently suggesting that maybe I should reconsider my position. As for the logistics, we'll figure it out. We're talking about 60 people, not 600. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by a different kind of anxiety. "Sarah, I don't have appropriate clothes for a wedding at Magnolia Plantation. I don't have a gift. I haven't met David's family. I'll be completely unprepared for tomorrow." Sarah laughed, and it was the first genuine laugh I'd heard from her in 8 years. "Dad, you're 72 years old and you've been to approximately 1 million weddings in your life. You have a navy suit that looks perfectly appropriate for a garden wedding, and the only gift I want is your presence." "What about meeting David? What about his family?" "David wants to meet you, and his family will love you because David loves you. Well, he loves the idea of you. Now he gets to love the actual you." And we talked for another hour about the wedding details and David's background and the gradual process of rebuilding a relationship that had been damaged but not destroyed. Sarah told me about her architectural firm, about the house she and David had bought in Mount Pleasant, about their plans to start a family and their shared dream of restoring an old Charleston single house. But mostly, we talked about Eleanor. "I miss her so much, Dad, especially this weekend. I keep wanting to call her and ask for advice about marriage, and about being a wife, and about how to balance love and independence. What do you think she'd tell you?" "She'd tell me that love isn't about losing yourself in another person. It's about becoming the best version of yourself because someone believes in your potential. She'd tell me that marriage is a partnership where both people help each other grow stronger roots so they can reach higher branches." I smiled, recognizing Eleanor's wisdom filtered through our daughter's understanding. That sounds exactly like what she'd say. "Dad, will you walk me down the aisle tomorrow?" The question hit me like lightning, unexpected, powerful, transformative. "Princess, nothing would make me happier. But are you sure? You've planned to walk alone. You've thought about this for months." "I planned to walk alone because I thought I needed to prove my independence. But 17-year-old me was right. Family isn't about dependence or independence, it's about interdependence. I want everyone to see that I come from love, that I was raised by people who taught me what commitment and partnership look like. We made plans to meet at Magnolia Plantation at 3 p.m. the following day, an hour before the ceremony, so I could meet David and his family, and we could have a few private minutes together before the official festivities began. After we hung up, I sat in Eleanor's chair until well past midnight, processing the conversation that had just transformed the trajectory of my relationship with my daughter. The journal had worked, not because it had manipulated Sarah into changing her mind, but because it had reminded her of values and priorities that had gotten lost in the fog of grief and estrangement. Saturday morning, I woke up with the kind of nervous energy I hadn't felt since Sarah's high school graduation. My daughter was getting married, and I was going to walk her down the aisle at one of Charleston's most beautiful venues, surrounded by family and friends who would witness Sarah beginning the next chapter of her life. I spent the morning preparing with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that Eleanor would have appreciated. I pressed my navy suit, polished my dress shoes, and selected a tie that Eleanor had given me for our 35th wedding anniversary. I stopped at Charleston Flower Market and bought a small bouquet of white roses for Sarah, not as a wedding gift, but as a gesture of love and support for the day ahead. At 2:30 p.m., I drove to Magnolia Plantation, my hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel as I turned into the parking area. The plantation was stunning in late April, with azaleas and camellias in full bloom, creating a backdrop of pink and white blossoms that looked like something from a fairy tale. I found Sarah in the bridal suite, an elegant room overlooking the Ashley River, where she was having final adjustments made to her dress. When she saw me in the doorway, her face lit up with the kind of pure joy I hadn't seen since she was a child. "Dad, you look perfect. You look like your mother on our wedding day," I replied, and meant it. Sarah was radiant in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or dress design, and everything to do with happiness that emerged from deep certainty about the choice she was making. 20 minutes later, David Torres found us, and I got my first real conversation with the man who was marrying my daughter. He was everything Sarah had said: intelligent, kind, genuinely funny, and clearly devoted to her in the kind of profound way that suggested he understood exactly how fortunate he was. "Mr. Harrison, I can't tell you how happy I am that you're here today. Sarah's been miserable about the estrangement between you, even though she was too stubborn to admit it." "I'm grateful to be here, David. And I'm grateful that Sarah found someone who obviously loves her the way she deserves to be loved. She's told me so much about your family, about her mother, about the values you taught her. I hope you know that those lessons are part of what I fell in love with." At 4 p.m., guests began taking their seats in the garden area where the ceremony would be held. At 4:15, David took his position at the altar, flanked by his groomsmen and looking both nervous and ecstatic. At 4:20, the string quartet began playing Pachelbel's canon, and I offered Sarah my arm. "Ready, princess? I've been ready for 8 years, Dad. I just didn't realize it until last night." We walked down the petal-strewn aisle together, past friends and family who were smiling and crying and celebrating the love they were witnessing. When we reached the altar, I kissed Sarah's cheek and placed her hand in David's, then took my seat in the front row, where Eleanor's chair had been left empty with a small bouquet of her favorite flowers. The ceremony was beautiful, personal vows that spoke of partnership and growth and shared dreams, readings that honored both families' traditions, and a kiss that sealed not just Sarah and David's union, but also the healing of relationships that had been broken and were now being restored. During the reception, as I watched Sarah and David dance their first dance as husband and wife, I felt Eleanor's presence more strongly than I had since her funeral. She would have loved this day, Not just because Sarah was happy, but because our family had found its way back to the love that had always been its foundation. Later that evening, as the celebration was winding down, Sarah found me at my table and sat down beside me. "Dad, thank you, not just for being here today, but for giving me back my 17-year-old voice." She reminded me of things I'd forgotten about what really matters. What did she remind you of? That love isn't about being perfect or never disagreeing or never getting hurt. It's about choosing to stay connected even when it's difficult, about forgiving each other for being human, and about remembering that family is the foundation that helps us grow into whoever we're meant to become. I squeezed her hand, thinking about the journal that had started this reconciliation and the girl who had written those wise words about growing stronger roots so you could reach higher branches. Princess, that 17-year-old girl grew up to be a remarkable woman. She just needed to remember that growing up didn't mean leaving love behind. Dad, there's something else I want to tell you. David and I have been talking about children, and when we have them, I want them to know their grandfather. I want them to hear stories about their grandmother, Eleanor. I want them to understand that they come from a family that believes love is stronger than disagreement. As the evening drew to a close and guests began saying their goodbyes, I realized that the journal had accomplished something I'd never dared hope for. It hadn't just brought me to Sarah's wedding. It had restored our family's future, ensuring that Eleanor's legacy of love would continue through grandchildren who would know the whole story of where they came from. 3 months after Sarah's wedding, I received a phone call that would change everything once again. "Dad, can you sit down? I have news." It was a Tuesday morning in July, and I was in my garden tending to the tomatoes that Eleanor had planted the year before her diagnosis. The plants had thrived under my care, producing more fruit than one person could possibly consume, so I'd been sharing the harvest with Margaret Chen and other neighbors who had become my unofficial support network during the years of estrangement from Sarah. "I'm already sitting, Princess. What's your news?" "David and I are pregnant." The words hit me like sunshine breaking through clouds. My daughter, who had spent 8 years believing that our family was too damaged to maintain, was now carrying the next generation of that same family. "Sarah, that's wonderful news. How are you feeling? When are you due?" "I'm feeling sick as a dog, which apparently is a good sign. And we're due in February. Dad, this baby is going to have a grandfather who tells stories and teaches life lessons and helps them understand where they come from." Over the next several months, I watched Sarah navigate pregnancy with the same thoughtful intensity she'd brought to every major life transition. She researched everything from prenatal vitamins to preschool philosophies, read every parenting book ever written, and peppered me with questions about what it had been like to raise her. "Were you scared when Mom was pregnant with me?" "Terrified, but also excited in a way I'd never experienced before. Your mother used to joke that I was more nervous about your arrival than she was. What was I like as a baby?" "Curious. You wanted to see everything, touch everything, understand how everything worked. You were walking at 10 months because crawling wasn't fast enough to satisfy your need to explore the world." These conversations became a regular part of our restored relationship. Sarah would call me several times a week, sometimes with practical questions about pregnancy and child rearing, sometimes just to talk about her hopes and fears for the future she was building. But the most meaningful conversations were about Eleanor. "I wish Mum could be here for this," Sarah said during one of our evening phone calls. "I wish she could give me advice about motherhood and meet her grandchild and help me figure out how to balance career and family." "She is here, Princess. She's in every lesson she taught you about love and strength and putting family first. She's in the way you care for David and the way you're already caring for your unborn child. She's in your voice when you talk about the kind of mother you want to be. Do you think she'd be proud of us for finding our way back to each other? I think she'd be proud that we remembered what she taught us about forgiveness and that we chose love over pride. In October, Sarah asked me to help her and David prepare the nursery in their Mount Pleasant house. The project became an opportunity for 3 generations to work together. David painting walls, while Sarah directed color schemes and I assembled furniture with the kind of methodical patience that retirement had taught me to appreciate. "Mr. Harrison," David said as we worked together on a crib that came with instructions written in what appeared to be 17 different languages. "I want you to know how grateful I am that you and Sarah reconciled before the baby arrives. This child is going to be so lucky to have you as a grandfather." "I'm the lucky one, David. A year ago, I thought I'd lost my daughter forever. Now I'm going to be a grandfather to your child, and I get to be part of Sarah's life again." As we worked, Sarah told us about her plans for maternity leave, her hopes for raising a child who would understand both their Mexican heritage from David's side and their southern roots from mine. She talked about wanting to continue family traditions while creating new ones, about teaching their child to value both independence and connection. "I want our child to grow up knowing that family is complicated but worth fighting for," she said, as we hung pictures of both sets of grandparents on the nursery walls. "I want them to understand that love doesn't mean perfection, it means commitment." In December, Sarah organized our first family Christmas celebration in 9 years. She and David hosted dinner at their Mount Pleasant house, with David's parents visiting from San Antonio and me bringing the green bean casserole that had been Eleanor's contribution to every holiday meal for 30 years. The evening was magical in ways I hadn't dared hope for. David's parents, Maria and Carlos Torres, welcomed me with the warmth that comes naturally to people who understand the importance of family. We shared stories about our children, our spouses, our hopes for the grandchild who would arrive in just 2 months. "William," Maria said as we were cleaning up after dinner, "Sarah talks about you constantly. About how patient you were when she was learning to drive, about how you taught her to change a tire, about how you supported her mother through illness with such grace." "Sarah's always been easy to love," I replied. "Even during our difficult years, loving her was never the problem. Finding our way back to each other was the challenge, but you did find your way back. That's what matters." On February 14th, Valentine's Day, in a piece of timing that Eleanor would have found perfectly romantic, Sarah gave birth to Eleanor Maria Torres, a 7-pound, 2-ounce girl with dark hair and David's eyes and Sarah's determined expression. I met my granddaughter when she was 6 hours old, holding her in the hospital room, while Sarah dozed and David called relatives in San Antonio with updates on the newest family member. "Hello, little Eleanor," I whispered to the tiny person who was gripping my finger with surprising strength. "I'm your grandfather, and I have so many stories to tell you about the woman you're named for." Eleanor, Ellie as we quickly began calling her, was indeed curious in the way Sarah had been as a baby. She wanted to see everything, touch everything, understand how everything worked. At 3 months old, she was already showing signs of the intellectual intensity that characterized both her parents. But more than that, she was healing, not just for me, but for our entire family. Sarah had been transformed by motherhood in ways that went beyond the obvious physical changes. She'd become more patient, more focused on what truly mattered, more committed to building the kind of family foundation that could support whatever challenges lay ahead. "Dad," she told me during one of my weekly visits to help with Ellie, "becoming a mother has made me understand Mom's choices in a completely different way. The idea of leaving a child, of missing even a day of their childhood because of medical treatment that might not work. I understand now why she chose quality over quantity." Your mother's decision was about love, Sarah. She wanted to spend whatever time she had left being present with us, rather than spending it in hospitals fighting treatments that would have made her sick without guaranteeing her cure. I wish I'd understood that 8 years ago. You understand it now. That's what matters. On Ellie's first birthday, Sarah asked me to do something I'd never expected. She asked me to tell the story of how our family had found its way back to each other. I want Ellie to understand, even if she's too young to remember the words, that love is stronger than pride or hurt or misunderstanding. I want her to know that her grandfather didn't give up on her grandmother or on me, even when we made it very difficult. So I told the story of the Purple Journal, of 17-year-old Sarah's wisdom about growing stronger roots, of the rehearsal dinner where past and present collided and created space for forgiveness. The most important thing, I concluded, looking at Ellie, who was playing contentedly with blocks on the floor, is that love persists even when it can't find expression. It waits patiently for the right moment, the right words, the right opportunity to remind people of what they mean to each other. 2 years later, when Ellie was old enough to toddle around my garden and help me tend the tomatoes that had become a family tradition, Sarah brought me another purple journal. "I found this at a bookstore in downtown Charleston," she said. "I thought maybe you'd like to start writing your own entries. Stories about Ellie, memories about Mom, thoughts about what it means to be a family." I accepted the journal with hands that shook slightly, not from age this time, but from emotion. "What should I write about first?" "Write about second chances," Sarah suggested. "Write about how a 17-year-old girl's voice was strong enough to bridge 8 years of silence. Write about how love finds a way, even when everything seems lost." That evening, I sat in Eleanor's chair, with the new purple journal open on my lap, watching the sunset paint the Charleston sky in shades of gold and pink. Outside, the azaleas Eleanor had planted were beginning their spring bloom, just as they had every year since her death, a reminder that beauty could emerge from what seemed barren. I began to write. My daughter said, "Don't come to my wedding," so I brought her childhood diary to the rehearsal. Not to embarrass her or force my way into an event where I wasn't wanted, but to remind her of who she used to be and what she used to believe about family love. The diary worked because it contained truth that transcended our disagreements. 17-year-old Sarah understood something that 42-year-old Sarah had temporarily forgotten, that growing up means growing stronger roots, not cutting them off entirely. Today, as I watched my granddaughter Ellie help me plant tomatoes in the same garden where her great-grandmother Eleanor once grew flowers, I realized that the Purple Journal had given us more than reconciliation. It had given us a future where love could flourish across generations, where family stories could be passed down, and where the lessons of the past could inform the hopes of tomorrow. Sometimes the most important conversations happen not between who we are, but between who we were and who we're becoming. Sometimes a teenage girl's voice is exactly what a grown woman needs to hear to remember her way home. I closed the journal and sat back in Eleanor's chair, feeling her presence in the evening air and Sarah's laughter drifting through the open windows as she and David and Ellie enjoyed dinner together at their Mount Pleasant house. The little girl who had once believed that family love could overcome anything had grown into a woman who proved that belief correct. And now she was raising another little girl who would grow up knowing that some truths are strong enough to survive even the deepest wounds and longest silences. Love finds a way. It always has, and it always will.